Welcome to the Syndicate from the Business of Hockey and the Goal with your hosts, Richard York and Les Kowalski. Sit down, have a cigar and scotch, listen to some good music, and we'll talk hockey and business. Let's start this episode. Welcome to the third episode of the Syndicate. It's going to be a pretty jam-packed episode. Where do you want to start?
Well, certainly I think we need to address how the last episode, the last Syndicate series finished up and wrapped up. We were talking about the Syndicate Lounge and where that third episode could be found. I think we need to address that so that the fan base knows where they can find it and when they can find it. We got lots of topics to talk about in this one. It's going to be an exciting one. We've been looking forward to doing this one for a while now. There's going to be some carryover from the last episode. Talk about the digital athlete a little bit more. We're going to focus on the ownership group in Calgary in this episode, the Calgary Flames. There's a lot of good and interesting things that they are doing in that organization, some offshoots that are really relevant to the topics that we have been talking about as far as analytics and business goes. That's going to be real exciting. So there's a few common threads from the previous episode that we're going to carry over into this episode.
One of the things that I think is really important is for people to know where they can find us online. With the Twitter account, it's BOH Goal, where you can go there and see things that we're posting, updates, specifically to the business of hockey. We now have a YouTube channel, which is under the business of hockey and the goal. And so the podcast episodes are being turned into a video format, are automatically posted on our YouTube channel in the event that our listeners don't have access to Spotify or Apple Podcast or Google Podcast. Just enter the business of hockey and the goal and it'll come up. The YouTube one, because everybody has that, it just made sense to actually integrate that part of it. And then the YouTube will also give us an additional option to go and explore new things. And we won't be doing just in the podcast. We'll be looking at adding potentially other videos, formats, other channels, and things like that. So that's kind of the first thing that I wanted to talk about. I guess the next thing is let's talk about this Syndicate Lounge. Why don't you start with it? I'll take it where you end off and the idea of what we're planning to do with that Syndicate Lounge.
When we picked the name, the Syndicate Lounge, it was wrapped around the basis of potential entrepreneurs and business owners and stuff coming together collectively and discussing practices and successes and stories. So it kind of seemed like it was going to have like a lounge setting where it was really laid back, and it still will be. But as we've moved forward into defining our product and defining our research and stuff like that, we've come to notice that it's going to be more about translating and educating. And as we go through our research and stuff like that, we felt that the name, the Syndicate Lounge, didn't really fit to what we're going to be posting in there. We went with something a bit more edgy, and we're going to call it the Syndicate Black Ops Blackboard. As we go into this episode a bit, we'll explain why we are calling it that. It's going to be a cool little format of getting a behind-the-scenes look, and the Blackboard element has more to do with a teaching platform than it is about a lounging platform.
We needed to flush this out for a multitude of reasons, including the technology and how were we going to roll this thing out. And so shifting it from the Syndicate Lounge to the Black Ops Blackboard, that makes a lot more sense. We're going to be coming out with that here very, very shortly. I guess where we want to start moving forward is let's start with the Calgary Flames. Turn this over to Richard and let him start with the Flames, and then we'll sort of go from there.
Let's talk about the Calgary Flames ownership. First and foremost, it sounds like they have a new arena deal in place, which is exciting. They were playing in the oldest arena in the league, so it needed to happen one way or another. So they have a new arena, new building. It's going to be state-of-the-art and exciting. And so they got lots of things happening up off the ice in Calgary right now. But what we want to focus on a little bit, recently they brought in Brian Burke, who's since been let go, but he was brought in to be the president of hockey operations between Ken King and the ownership group, and obviously the management of the hockey franchise. Now he was brought in to help take over the hockey department and get them steered in a new direction. Now, the Calgary ownership group recently, before they hired Brian Burke, they interviewed Brendan Shanahan for the position, but for whatever reason, Brendan Shanahan turned it down. And it may have something to do with it being a temporary position, because after Brian Burke was eventually let go, the excuse they used to the media anyway was that Brian Burke was hired with the initiative of it just being a temporary position to get the management and the hockey operations all flowing steady in the same direction. So as it stands now, Calgary does not have a quote-unquote president of hockey operations.
So why did the Flames bring in Brian Burke?
Well, they brought him in because they were on the hamster wheel for a while, like a lot of hockey franchises suffer through. And certainly it was to bring like we talk about culture, this is another evidence of it. Based on his experience and his previous resume, he knew what franchise needed. He had varying degrees of success in Toronto, but he was still knowledgeable enough to know that you need a structure in place, you need a template in place, and you need a culture in place. And what Brian Burke went out and did was that he fired the general manager at the time, and he fired a lot of the management and the scouting. And he went out and he found himself a guy named Brad Treliving, who was an assistant general manager for the Arizona Coyotes at the time. He's a reasonably young guy. You know, he was cutting his teeth in there. Something I found fascinating. And, you know, if I ever get the chance to talk to Brian Burke, it's something I'd like to ask him about. That when he hired Brad Treliving, he told media that it may seem like Brad Treliving was the happiest guy in the room during that decision, but Brian Burke said that it was him, that Brian Burke was the happiest man in the room. Brad Treliving was number one on his list. And I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe he already admitted that to somebody else that I haven't heard. I would love to know what credentials that Brad Treliving brought in that jumped out at him so much that made him number one on Brian Burke's list on the opposite side of the continent, basically. So it was interesting to see that transition. And Brad Treliving was never a general manager before, but he was an assistant general manager. He was brought in, and Brian Burke helped coach and direct and steer him to lead the management group of that franchise. So it was almost like he was doctored into the position over a couple of years. And that seems to be like the grandfathering thing that Brian Burke was probably brought in for. That Calgary went through a few experienced general managers and they didn't have a lot of success. They went through a Sutter, they went through Jay Feaster, and who won a cup in Tampa Bay, but it wasn't working for them. And they were having a big youth movement in Calgary, and Brian Burke felt that they needed a youth movement in management as well. So he brought in a bunch of new faces for the new young hockey players. It was exciting to see where it all went. So some of the things that Brad Treliving talked about recently in a podcast where he was interviewed by Elliot Freeman was really fascinating. He referred to the analytical department in the Calgary Flames as the Black Ops division of the hockey franchise. And he referred that to every franchise, as that it was their Black Ops division. That's part of why we want to call this the VIP section, the Black Ops Blackboard, is that we feel analytics is going to play a huge part in what we're talking about behind the scenes, because as time goes on, it's making more and more of an impact in ownership decisions and management decisions. It's making a huge wave that you just can't ignore. So the idea that he brought up, the idea of it being a Black Ops, was very fascinating. He wouldn't get too much into what they look at analytically. You're going to find that with every franchise. It literally is their Black Ops, and they're not going to reveal too much about it.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up with Black Ops Blackboard, when we talk about translating analytics, it's not just the data science of analytics. This is also about translating analytics to business leadership that are unfamiliar with this. It can go through management on a lot of different levels. It's really important. A tool is available to be able to explain this in a way, and the value of analytics, so that there is buy-in from that end. One of the challenges from the leadership side, you don't want to be embarrassed. One of the problems when you come down with technology, some leadership will not ask questions because they feel it will not allow them to maintain sort of the upper hand in their organization, and that they'll be seen as weak by their employees or other people. And the way that we looked at this was that it was important to be able to explain the data science behind this, but there needs to be a tool for leadership. And that is one of the directions for the Black Ops Blackboard, to be able to provide that translating component so that there is an understanding. And also for those individuals who are entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs, there's a lot to be learned from hockey, a benchmark to be able to use it in some way. You know, you can see how they do different methods and different processes and how that would be applied to a smaller business. When you run a large organization that is worth over 100 million, 200 million, 500 million, regardless of what you see on the ice, that organization has to have very strong processes to function, because you're dealing with very very large numbers. And so even though the on ice product may not perform and win a cup, you can't have the front office fall apart completely because it needs to be able to pay salaries. It has to be able to pay the league. There's a whole range of reasons for it. As we move forward with this, that Black Ops perspective makes a lot of sense. And a lot of the franchises that are within the league have Black Ops departments in order to gain competitiveness. That is the whole point of implementing programs. It doesn't matter if it's hockey. It doesn't matter if it's basketball. It doesn't matter if it's football. It doesn't matter if it's another sport like soccer. At the end of the day, it's about, can you do certain things within the organization in order to maintain your current competitiveness and increase that competitiveness and gain an edge in whatever that you need to do.
And we talk about translating analytics for the fan base, but when you get into these franchises, lots of general managers aren't data scientists. If you throw them a data sheet based on a player, they're not going to know what that means. So they have to hire people to translate that for them. And in Calgary, they hired a guy named Chris Snow in September as an assistant general manager to lead their data processing division. So he's basically acting as the translator between Brad Treliving and the data scientists that work under him. Now, having brought up Chris Snow, he was recently diagnosed with ALS in December, and that's very tragic. There is no cure for that yet. So we just want to reach out to him as we speak about him. No, we do it out of respect. We know that you and your family are going through a tough time right now, and me and Les and our families are praying for you, and we hope that this goes smoothly for you, and there's always the hope of a cure. So know that when we talk about you, it's out of respect for what you're doing and for what you represent. Moving forward here, when we talk about Chris Snow as acting as the translator for Brad Treliving, Brad talked about how he couldn't read data sheets. That's why they have people do it for him. He admitted one of the things he did give us a little peek hole into the Black Ops. What he did admit is that at the end of every game, player gets a report card. Each report card gives a number value. And I think he brought up 101 being the best or the highest or really, really good. And a score of 8 was the worst. So it's a very big range of numbers that you basically get a review on how you play, a report card on how you played that game. And they take into account probably everything. And that goes into that data processing. So it gives him an extra tool to use, and he uses that report card and he looks back at the video footage to support the report card. If he was watching a player and he thought that player had a good game, but they got a bad report card, he'd have to go and confirm why. Like what did he miss? What was the report saying compared to what he thought? So it was about him, you could say, cleansing the data, or, confirming. He was cleaning up his analysis of how that player played that game. So it was a very useful tool for him on analyzing his player's performance game by game. And Chris Snow is part of that translating department that oversees that. When we talk about Chris Snow, he's not an old guy. It's unfortunate that he's been diagnosed with this sickness that runs through his family as well. But he comes from a sports media background in baseball, actually. He's from Massachusetts, so he was dealing a lot with the Boston Red Sox, actually. And he dabbled a little bit with the Minnesota Wild, I heard. But having gone from a sports media background into data science translator, it shows that he has the people person skills, he has communication skills. But also when you're dipping into baseball, the analytical usage in baseball is crazy. The amount of data that they use and stuff. So I'm sure he got a little bit of exposure to what it's like in a different league like baseball that uses it to the extreme as compared to what hockey is just starting to get into.
With respect to Chris Snow, you are in our prayers and we'll be thinking of you. So it's interesting that you bring up the whole baseball thing, because I was online and I came across a post by the San Francisco Giants, and they did a poll. And in this poll, they asked, is baseball better off now or before analytics? Instincts or computers? Eyeball test or spreadsheets of mass data? Which do you prefer? 230 people voted. 34.8% said that they preferred the analytics version of baseball. 65.2% voted that they prefer the pre-analytic version of baseball. What are your thoughts on that?
When you look at hockey and stuff like that, and you get a hockey fan that has been a fan of hockey for a long time, they love hockey the way it was when they became a fan. That is why they became a fan. So as the hockey league, and just like the baseball league too, I'm sure, has evolved as far as their technology use, their data coverage, their rules and regulations, as those evolve, so does the fan base. If you choose not to evolve, that means you like the template or what it was or where it was before everything changed.
I was reading some posts, and I mean, there is some aggressiveness out there. I mean, on the hockey side, I was reading one post in particular where it was an older guy. He seemed like he was in his like probably mid 50s, and a younger guy who was in his early 20s. They were going at it. It got very aggressive. They started talking about generational differences. I was really, really surprised. I can understand people will be passionate about their sports, and I can understand they're passionate about hockey. What you're saying, there's a lot of truth to that. You're going to have a lot of individuals out there that don't understand analytics and don't want to hear it. The moment you say the word analytics, everyone's mind goes to Kyle Dubas. And I was reading some posts with that had to do with Kyle Dubas after what had happened recently. They're talking about how analytics have failed. If we go back to what Dubas was saying 2015, it takes time. This is not a quick fix. Analytics is something that you have to look at and implement and gather data over a long term. This is not something that is just, let's do a season and we're winners. It doesn't work that way. And I think a lot of people are being really hard on Dubas because he's young.
Well, they demand results.
Some people were talking about how Shanahan has to be let go to bring in someone like Dubas. Yet here you have a franchise where there's a level of progressiveness in what they're doing. And at the end of the day, you can't sit on the sideline. It doesn't matter if you're on the business side or if you're an elite athlete, you have to maintain a certain level of performance and competitiveness. And at the end of the day, if the franchise and the business can't perform, then that creates a problem also for the fan base. It was very, very aggressive. I don't see the aggressiveness towards Chayka in Arizona as much as I see aggressiveness towards Dubas in Toronto.
That's the media coverage difference.
And I can see that, or there is a major differential between the two. If you don't understand something, why are you shutting it down? If analytics is being brought into every sport on the planet, just because you don't understand it doesn't mean that there isn't value to it. It's that unfortunate thing where you'll have groups of people. Let me read you some of this off this one poll post. So some of the things that were written, I'm still learning what all the analytics mean and how to track them myself, but I believe that baseball should be brought into the 21st century. It's weird, I'd say pre-analytics, but you'd have to wipe my memory of any new age baseball knowledge. Otherwise, it would drive me nuts knowing there was a better way out there. Another one is information helps, but pre-analytics was unquestionably better. There were already enough stats available before analytics for anyone who truly knows baseball to make decisions. Analytics came about more for people who were making decisions but didn't necessarily know baseball. Another one here is from an entertainment standpoint, pre-analytics, as you had more of a running game, bunting and general small ball, etc. I did pick analytics, though, as the more data you have and the different ways of evaluating the game will, in my opinion, give you a better chance of winning games. And another one, data is about probability of success, and only part of the story seems used for salary negotiation and trades.
Okay, well, let's eat into some of that a little bit here.
This has been part 1 of The Syndicate from the Business of Hockey and the Goal. Next week, we'll be posting part 2. Thanks for listening to The Syndicate from the Business of Hockey and the Goal. Till next week. Thanks for listening to The Syndicate from the Business of Hockey and the Goal, produced by the Power Roadmap Podcast. Until next time.